This is LSU wide receiver Brian Thomas Jr.
6'3", 209, could run 4.34, scored 17 touchdowns at LSU against SEC competition, only 21 years old. What am I missing? Why isn't this a top 4 wide receiver class? Everyone views him as kind of the second tier of wide receivers. I think he's pretty damn close to the top tier. It's going to take some development, but I really liked what I saw from Brian Thomas.
As you said, 68 receptions this past year at LSU, over 1,100 yards, 17 touchdowns, 17. You mentioned the 4.33 40, out of 1.5 10-yard split, 82nd percentile vertical jump, 79th percentile broad jump. Those are some stats that matter. I will add some more. 26 of his 69 receptions this past season went for 15 plus yards. Hayden, it's pretty simple. Big man, run fast, create chunk gains, changes games.
Yeah, he averaged 30.4 yards per target on these targets that traveled 20 plus air yards downfield. He actually caught 15 of 22, which is incredible stuff here for 670 yards and 12 touchdowns. He can win downfield from the inside and the outside. Primarily played on the outside 87% of his snaps. Malik Nabers actually played a lot of slot. We discussed that in his video. They actually had Brian Thomas as the isolated wide receiver for a bunch. In fact, among Power 5 wide receivers, he actually led every one of them in EPA per route as the isolated wide receiver, averaged 5 yards per route run in those situations. So he had to run a few more kind of high caliber routes compared to Malik Nabers. And I thought the thing that Brian Thomas Jr. does better than almost every prospect in the class is he can win on the release and stack his corner, and he provides a very big catch radius for somebody that can run 4.34 speed. So I think at the very minimum, you're winning down the field with him, and I think there's a chance that maybe we can develop a little bit more of a well-rounded route tree.
Downfield routes are definitely the name of his game at the moment. I mean, so many double moves when watching him. So many. It was something like 58% of his routes in 2022 were either goes or hitches. 57 of 87 routes in 2023 were goes or hitches. That's 65%. Again, it's that LSU offense that's kind of working on that straight line, either break it off or continue on down the field. I will add, he is excellent with bucket catching and tracking that ball, right? He definitely gives his quarterback space from the numbers to the sideline. He doesn't like leave this tiny little window that Jaden Daniels had to throw the football to. And that's important, especially, again, a stat that matters. 58 targets that he saw this season were outside the numbers versus only 33 in between them, right?
Wow.
So he definitely was in the alley. He worked in that alley. And while it's a condensed space, he did, I think, make it pretty big in terms of those vertical downfield routes for his quarterback and Jaden Daniels. I will say, I will never throw a 6'3", 209-pound wide receiver who runs a 4.33 40 into the trash. But I had a lot of other questions if he can become more than this downfield burning wide receiver. We know that he is young and hopefully there is some development, but I just didn't see a lot of it beyond that. In fact, I thought he was a really, really poor yards after catch player in terms of catching it and then trying to make someone miss. I thought he went down super easy on contact. And again, because of this offense, we didn't see a lot of multiple breaking routes, especially working towards the middle of the field.
Very few in or out breaking routes, but what caught my eye was the 42% of his targets were on these hitch routes. So what LSU kept asking him to do is catch the ball without any momentum, stop, turn around, and make a guy miss. That's pretty difficult to do for somebody that's his size. I thought he was excellent at this start-stop mobility. I thought he actually had a lot of flexibility. There's some splash plays, yards after the catch underneath, and that's why I'm maybe a little bit more bullish than you are, that I can see him develop into these in-breaking and out-breaking routes as well, because I did see some knee bend and some agility after the catch in these kind of hitch routes. Now, it's a big progression because, like you said, very few routes, crossing routes, in-breaking routes, all that type of stuff, slant routes. But I did see some freaky skills on these kind of start-stop situations where I think over time, maybe he is going to be able to be that true X wide receiver that can win on in-breaking routes and become actually more of a possession wide receiver than what he showed at LSU, which he was not in any capacity. So I think that's kind of the bet that I'm willing to make with Brian Thomas is, even though he wasn't doing those type of routes, I thought that he actually had the bend to maybe in a couple years from now be that true number one wide receiver that can see like 10 targets per game.
A few of his big plays after the catch did happen when he caught it. He took like one step back. The corner or defensive back overran it, and then he obviously has that acceleration.
Yep.
I mean, he is super fast to almost run around them, and then he's gone. I want to add and reiterate that to me, there were plenty of times where he almost got like ragdolled after the catch. Like he got tackled and spun, and PFF charted him this year with 12 missed tackles force. If you go back and watch those moments, yeah, he made the first man miss, but within a yard or two, he was immediately tackled by the next guy. You know, so I didn't see someone that was super creative after the catch. In fact, again, I thought he almost got thrown around a bit, either submarined or tackled low and fell to the ground. I think it's really up to him. Like, I don't know Brian Thomas Jr. at all. I don't know what his development is. I think from watching this team, Malik Nabers was the dog, and to me, Brian Thomas was kind of a secondary piece who obviously was super productive. But can he go to the team and become the alpha? Can he go to a team and add on beyond this almost linear player, which is a really good role player? But that's a huge bet for me to make in the top 15 or top 20 in the NFL draft, because I've seen multiple breaking routes and more nuanced development, I think, from other types versus what Brian Thomas, despite it being an important role and a game-changing role, I'm a little nervous that there's going to be more because I just don't know the answer to it.
So you think it could be like more 6 to 8 targets per game, vertical stuff, lots of air yards, but maybe not like that every
high variance.
Yeah.
I think there's a big gap between being a high variance, game-changing player versus week in, week out, drive in, drive out, go-to target.
Okay. I think that's where we're starting with him. I think that's almost a lock for him to be in that role. I think that there's a decent chance that he can develop a little bit more. And that one stat that kind of stood out to me, of all the wide receivers in this class, he actually had the 3rd highest success rate on his targets, which is pretty crazy for how often he was getting these downfield looks, and all these hitch routes that he was sitting on, he was actually making those a successful play. So I think that's kind of where I'm hoping that he can become more than that. And just the production is just off the charts. 85th percentile when you age adjust that. Only 4 of his receptions came behind the line of scrimmage too. So all of this production that he had was very well earned, especially against the corners that he was going with. Almost 20 fantasy points per game, always is winning on the outside, lots of isolated snaps as well. So I think just to me, the thing that constantly stuck out to me is he was able to get on top of his defender down the field. And then you're talking about this huge bucket, this huge zone to drop this ball into. I think it's because the corner is usually behind him. And then he has these huge, long arms and the speed to track things down. So I thought that was like a really special kind of trait. I think very valuable in the NFL.
Again, the bucket tracking I thought was really good. There were moments I saw when he had to turn to face the football and almost work back to it, where I saw some issues too. Like some of his drops ended up in that way, losing in contact in those situations too. You're going to hate the baseline comparison that I throw out there.
Okay.
Brashad Perryman. Brashad Perryman was a first-round pick, had a super productive final season. Granted, it was at UCF. An awesome athlete on top of it, almost the exact same size. But I think the question with Brashad Perryman was, will he ever become more than this high variance downfield player? Again, I think that's the baseline player that you're getting from here, but that was one name that popped into mind when watching Brian Thomas Jr.
Mine is a taller version of Terry McLaurin, and they're about the same size and same speed. Brian Thomas has just got like 2 or 3 inches on Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin's primarily a downfield wide receiver, a little bit better, kind of like winning with speed and not the catch point that you're talking about. But I think the difference is Brian Thomas is a massive man, where Terry McLaurin's more average size. And Terry McLaurin, I think, would have been very much a first-round pick if we had to redo his draft. And Terry McLaurin also an older prospect, so I think that I'm just kind of envisioning what Brian Thomas could look like in 2-3 years from now. I agree that he's not as polished as the Rome Odunzes and those type of wide receivers. But I think one step down, I think I can see him in like the top 10 to 18 kind of range. Jacksonville, I think the Colts, those type of teams in the middle teens, I think is a pretty appropriate draft grade for me, which might be a little bit more richer than what you think.
Yeah, you've tweeted that. Why isn't this statistical profile a top 15 pick? I mean, I have my concerns, but you seem pretty steadfast in that belief.
95th percentile speed score, and he's 6'3". So it's, and I've seen him do it against the toughest competition, and I liked what I saw in those isolated routes, winning downfield. So I'm just gonna bet on the traits and 17 touchdowns. It's not a bad profile.
No, definitely not. By the way, if those of you want to see maybe a game that to me showed some concerns. And obviously, it was back in 2022, but it was that Georgia game. I thought he got bodied a little bit, hip pocket, lost through contact pretty frequently. I've seen Martavis Bryant thrown out as a comparison too. Again, the game-breaking big plays are there. I think Martavis Bryant was like nearly special after the catch in terms of with the ball in his hands behind the line of scrimmage, manufactured touches. There was some cool stuff. I don't think Brian Thomas is going to be that, but maybe you think a comparison is closer. And just quickly, I think Terry McLaurin is just more of like a dog, like a hammer in terms of going up and getting the football versus what we've seen from Brian Thomas so far.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, the other people that are kind of looking in the dynasty streets, looking at his analytical profile, he didn't do a lot as a freshman and a sophomore at LSU. Obviously, much harder to play as a freshman and sophomore at LSU. And the other thing, just not just for Brian Thomas, but just in general, I think that this early breakout age is going to be a little bit harder because the transfer rules, like all of a sudden you're a freshman coming in there. Well, guess what? That player that was really balling out at Tulane, for example, is now on your team as a senior. Now you're trying to compete with those guys. So I think I'm going to be a little bit more graceful when it comes to players at the best universities out there that did not produce as a freshman or a sophomore.
Yeah, this is a much longer conversation. But now with the transfer rules that we have plus NIL, it's not a shock to me if multiple great talents go to these big schools and they're loaded up on it. And that means someone is further down the depth chart and they do go to a second school and boom, they break out in their final season there. That's obviously not what happened to Brian Thomas Jr. here. He was a 3-year player. But again, it used to be some binary thought that, hey, if he didn't break out at 19 or 20 years of age, then it's over. And that needs to change now in this era of transfers and NIL.
Yep. The thing I'm always going to look at is early declare. That means the NFL told you to come out. If you declared early, that's a massive win. Plus Power 5, Brian Thomas is checking.
But at the same time, early declare, NIL, you can stay in school and still earn some money now.
Not first round wide receiver money. So that's going to be the difference.
Or you just love being in the college lifestyle. Yeah. Again, some of my notes have been negative. I do want to say the baseline role that he brings to the table. Think of how many wide receivers in free agency had speed. Very little this year. Teams pay for speed. Teams draft for speed. And he brings the juice in that department. So at the very least, like that is going to be a huge asset for that team. Okay, go check out the rest of the prospect videos that we have here. Obviously, you can tell that Hayden and I do not compare notes prior to these prospect videos because that's what makes it even more fun. You are kind of sitting in here on our conversations. Subscribe, thumbs up. We'll check on the next one.